Now, it doesn't matter if you have a 5-acre parcel or a 100-acre parcel, the concepts are still the same that you have to manage with. When you get to larger parcels, especially 500, 800 and larger, then you can afford to make a few mistakes. The problem is you make one mistake in one area, usually people transfer that across their entire acreage. So it doesn't matter if you have 1,000 acres or more. The problem is that, not problem is, good thing is you can only have so many stand locations and blind locations. So if you have a parcel that big, then usually the size of a parcel encompasses a lot of mistakes that you can make. And so you might still have a corner or two that is still working for you. But when it comes to small parcels, truly small parcels where it's 80 to 100 acres and less, and especially like in the case of this one's 15 acres, 5 acres, 10 acres. Dylan had a 25-acre piece the other day. My Michigan client last week, or Michigan trip last week, client trip, I had 2 that were 10 acres and 1 that was 15 acres. So I routinely work on very small parcels. The problem is, you know, all you have is a little corner. So if you mess that up, you're done. And so I want to talk about this piece right here. And I'm hoping that you can take some of these features and why I recommended certain things to this parcel and how it'll work really well. I'm very excited for this parcel. It's a thumb area of Michigan, very flat, not a lot of woods around there. And so those are some good things, actually, especially not a lot of woods, which usually in flatland, that's the way it is, unless it's all swamp. But when it's ag country, not a lot of woods, that means the cover and food that you have is at a premium in the area, both cover and food. So before, this parcel was food plot right in the middle in the square, stand location right on the food plot, stand location up here that could see the food plot a little bit, cover back here, this is it, right here. A couple acres of cover on the back here. The rest of it was wide open. Had some conifers that were old conifers planted along the sides that probably planted 20 years ago. They're 20 feet tall, mostly Scotch pine, a few spruce mixed in, occasional white pine, kind of a blend, and this is what grew. And so there's a little bit of cover there. Out in the open ground, there's patches of red osier dogwood. A lot of people would love that. It's already established. It's eaten down to stems right now. Some briars out there, some choke cherry just scattered. It's really not a lot of cover. The only cover, they had a little bit of autumn olive. That's actually supplying some cover right now. It's only kind of cover that they have for small game. They have pheasant out there sometimes. They have rabbits, but they can get under that autumn olive, and then you get over to the cover side and you actually get into some tag alder and then some timber along an old ditch line that's dried up that runs north to south through here. So really out here, there's about 13 acres of open cover where if you stand, if there's a deer out there right now with a little snow on the ground, you can see everywhere around the entire 13 acres. In the 2 acres, there's a little bit of cover. On the neighbor, there's a neighbor's driveway that comes right here. So, and then neighbor has open fields that they mow. So really not a lot there to hold deer. And we really wanted to do something with that. And there always is something that you can do. Well, this way, about a half mile is a big woods. And big around there is 40 acres. That's where a lot of the deer come from. And that's the direction the majority of the deer come from. So going over to here, they need to have food. Food plot is still important. But I want that food located to one side. I want it on the opposite side of where the deer come from. So if deer are down here coming mostly, then I don't want it right here because there's no reason for them. These two are roads right here. Same with right here. This is a road. It's actually a neighbor right here, a neighbor right here. So big houses and neighbors, and this is all ag. All the way around here is ag. So I want when those deer to come on the property, I don't want them just stepping across the road. It's a dirt road. Step across through the field, step across the road, and then they're in the food right there. I want them to actually transfer through the entire property. I want them to go all the way through to have to get that food. That means whatever cover choices we're making, whatever we're doing in there, then those deer will actually hit the cover choices and be more invited to stay. They actually stay into the cover after they eat on the food. And there's another house up here even, as opposed to just going back to where they came from. They're more invited on the property. So that was one thing, is getting rid of this food. We turned that into switchgrass. Just a nice switchgrass bank. It's flanked by thick cover all the way around it. So now the deer can bed on any side and they have a little thermal protection. In this red area, instead of being open with red osier dogwood pockets, a little cherry and a couple autumn olives, I want pockets of switchgrass. So I want them to choose areas that might be a 20 foot by 30 foot area of switchgrass. That's it. So they're going to put that in between the red osier dogwood cuttings. What that'll do with the amount of cover that's there, it'll actually help offset some of the browse that's taking place on the red osier dogwood, because right now, with no appreciable food plot, that food plot was eaten down to the dirt, it was their first year, with no other browse in the property, then the deer just eat the red osier dogwood at night, they come over. I don't want this necessarily to be a nighttime property. I want it to hold deer in cover during the day and let the deer go out to the ag fields after night. Instead of the deer bedding in this, they find a lot of deer bedding out there because it's a nighttime bedding. When you have low cover, deer can see around and they have some browse, they'll sit there all night. I want them to take that visibility away. I want them to make the deer feel that this is more like a daylight parcel, or they're not moving much during the daylight. Bucks express 95% of the home range at night. Does express the same. So I want them to go off the property. I don't want them to be there all night. I want them to be pocketed in during the daytime so they're not wandering around. They'll hit this cover during the winter time when it's lacking in the area. They'll hit the browse, but during the season I want them to hold during the day instead of just being a nighttime visitor. So all this entire area, you'll see that on the drawing that I finally gave to the client. But I want those little yellow areas, those pockets of switchgrass, to last. I want those to be 20 by 30 feet and actually be very strong. And in a flat area, 6 feet of switchgrass, 7 feet of switchgrass is very appreciable. And that's all you need to make sure you support that surrounding browse. So I'm having them choose lean areas of red osier dogwood and install those pockets. Now, along the road here, making sure that they take these openings, they don't have a lot of space to work with. So there is some pine structure in there, and then there's a little bit of briar in front of the pines. It seems like both went together. They have some gaps to fill. They can put switchgrass in there, which they're already going to have switchgrass in those pockets out in the main body of cover. Not going to be able to see through it anymore, but I want there to be a wall, and I want there to be a quick wall because these were retiring age clients, 2 brothers, and I don't want them to wait 10 years, 12 years, 15 years for conifers to fill in. They've already had a hard time growing their conifers in the first place, and I believe it's because they were browsed on. One side has a power line across it, so the power line, those conifers aren't going to be there someday anyways. So I want them to plant miscanthus grass to cover those pockets right there. We like miscanthus grass when it's under power lines and when you need to take up very little space. Want them to plant at least 3 rows, 2-foot spacing, so they're really literally only taking up 4 feet of space to plant these miscanthus grass, 1 row, 2nd row, 3rd, staggered so that you can develop a wall you can't see through. When you combine the switchgrass on the interior, the briars that are taking place, some of the shrubs that are going in, the choke cherry, which I'm going to have them hinge cut any tree that's out there that doesn't need to be. There's no canopy tree they need out there. So I want them to hinge cut it lightly with a hinge cut tool so it doesn't break them over. They're doing that when the sap's flowing, when it's a little bit warmer weather, so they're not cracking. They have a little bit of willow on the property too that are more trees, weeping willow. They can hinge cut those, get a lot of regeneration, and if they happen to break them and cut them off, you just get that out of the ground. There'll be willows growing all over the place. Be great. And then they have a little pocket of aspen on the one side. That's more around the old food plot space. So that's what we're doing to fill in the sides, protect those, build a wall around this property with the pine, miscanthus grass. And they won't need a lot of miscanthus grass. That's a good thing. And then just switchgrass pockets on the inside. They don't need that height. For example, I was on a client property in Michigan, big expanse of about 30 acres of switchgrass out of 100 acres, and it was all converted ag field. And then they literally took miscanthus grass pockets and planted in the middle of switchgrass. Well, that doesn't do a thing. It's more grass. There's no browse. They had a problem with not having enough browse in there, so they needed to take pockets out. And I didn't tell them to take the pockets of miscanthus grass out, but the bottom line is miscanthus grass and switchgrass is just more of the same. That's like saying, well, they like bedding in conifer, so I'm going to put white pine in pockets and a bunch of red pine, and that's where the deer are going to bed. They might because of a habitat diversity change, but they have to have browse in there, which isn't supplied by conifer or miscanthus grass or grass. So, and the one thing I like about miscanthus grass is people can say it's not a native, but it doesn't spread either. It's sterile. There's no root system. There's no seed head that's going to expand. So where you plant it, it stays. Kind of like there's some people, and this is exactly the way I look at it. You have a beautiful wooded upland setting that's all natives. Grasses, shrubs, trees, regeneration, conifers, whatever's coming in there. Forbs, forages, broadleafs, whatever mix is coming in there. And someone will say, it's a beautiful native area. Or someone else will say they'll have a pocket like that of upland growth, and there'll be some invasives like autumn olive, say some honeysuckle, You need to get rid of all that because it's an invasive. But that same person will go to that first example of a beautiful native upland setting and build a house. They'll build a house there. They'll build a driveway there. They'll build a pole building there. They have walking trails. They take all that native vegetation out to build a house, and that's okay. And I'm not saying you shouldn't build a house, but the hypocrisy is real, folks. You're doing this here with a house. You're changing and altering the landscape, but that's okay because you're going to live there. But over here, you can't plant something that is useful for wildlife, even though it's non-native and won't spread, but because it's non-native, you don't plant it. Oh, folks, that house wasn't native. What you changed the habitat with. I'm just trying to help you see outside the box. But anyways, we're putting miscanthus grass. That's helping fill in those walls. The switchgrass on the interior. Hinge cutting whatever tree is out there so you can get some more horizontal cover and regeneration and growth of browse. And then on this inside right here, the inside of that cover, a lot of shagbark hickory. There's a few oaks. And I'm looking at dropping, so if it's a big tree, 8 inches, 10 inches, they're all leaning to that sun facing west, then I want them to cut those trees, let them fall out away from the edge into the field. Now you have grasses and growth that grows up in the regeneration that grows up in there, and it won't blow over or fall over because of wet snow, any grass in those top limbs. Also, I want them to hinge cut. So when there's trees that are 6 to 7 inches and down, they can hinge cut them. And that tree will expand all the way out into the field, drop, sunlight will hit it, the branches are on the ground, a lot of times it takes root, especially box elder, shagbark hickory. If there's any ash that are left over, those are all very prolific at regenerating, and you're basically expanding that cover out into the woods. Now back here, because that west afternoon sun is just looking through trunks now, not those exterior branches on the outside of the woodlot that are shading the inside. Now you're cutting all those. Now sunlight can spill into that thin strip back here and make that thin strip of cover very, very thick, except the extreme eastern edge, what you want to be able to access into and access along your neighbor's driveway. I don't want thick cover. There's already a bunch of thick autumn olive and briars holding rabbits and pheasant on that outside layer going over into the neighbors. So you don't need to make that edge thick. You're walking through that, sitting down in a stand in the middle, up at the top there, and waiting in the morning for deer to come. So you have morning stands here. You have intermediate stands, like a morning stand possibly here, even out in the corner. Add a water hole here, water hole here. Those water holes are still 300 yards apart in a dry area. So really good spot where we can take a deer travel corridor and we can actually have a corridor, especially on a small parcel like that where travel corridors are more of a premium, and I can have that corridor run all the way inside this property and in front of stands, and that's where the deer will travel. They come onto the property, they hit the travel corridor, they turn left or right. Pretty easy to follow in front of stand locations, 2 water holes. And so a lot that you can pack into a small parcel. I often say that, we don't spend as much time walking around a small parcel, but it still takes up the same spot or same place on a tablet to draw it out. It's larger. 80 acres is smaller. You're packing more into a small parcel per acre because the client has time to do so, and you have to make those connections. You're not thoughtfully just mimicking the trails and mimicking and attaching it to funnels that are naturally occurring on a big property, because you have you have acres to waste. On a small parcel, you can't waste anything. So on this property, 15 acres, we're still, if you look at between the stand locations, and I'm just going to draw this in and fill it in just so it takes away all the mess, including food plots. What's more important for a sanctuary or to be in a sanctuary? The food plot or the bedding area? The food plot. Food plot's critical because if deer aren't hitting that food plot up there on the north side every single day and they feel comfortable doing so during daylight, they're not in those bedding areas, period. So you can afford to spook out a bedding area because a buck might just shift over and hit that food plot during the daylight. But if you spook out the food plot, you're in trouble, and that's what 95% of all food plotters do or more. It's very serious. But in this right here, you'll take that because of the roads you can use for access, walking into stands, and the fact that deer are used to some noise on the road. You're screening in alongside the road so you can't see in from the road. People traveling by, deer can't see out. Then you can get 15 acres and turn that into 12 acres of deer sanctuary where you never enter, 11, somewhere around there, where it's all deer all the time. Right now there's 2 acres. They sit, they blow their scent into it, they access from it. So that means there's 0 out of 15 acres that are working for them to hold deer all the time on the property, and they can quickly change that. Switchgrass comes in 2 years, it'll be 6 to 7 feet tall. The first year it should be 40 inches to 4 feet in the thumb area right there. And that Miscanthus grass should be appreciable in 3 to 4 years on good soil like that. Now if they're up north in Michigan, sandy soil, we might recommend pines, because that Miscanthus grass is not going to grow very well in sandy soil up north. So it's very site specific to any of these habitat improvements. Bottom line is they can turn what is effectively 0 acres that are working for them for their deer hunting and habitat dreams out of 15 acres into 12 acres, 11 acres out of 15 that's working for them and truly working for them, where they have that mixture of daytime browse, daytime cover, deer can't see out, people can't see in, they now have water, they have more appreciable food. It'll end up about an acre and a half of food on that property. They'll have hard regeneration, briars, sunlight hitting the ground, promoting herbaceous growth inside the woods where it's just all open timber right now. They'll have an effective deer trail to hunt. They'll have an assemblage of stands instead of stands being random, and they hunt them evening or morning spook deer all the time if they're around, getting out or getting in. Now they'll have defined morning stands. They'll have an assemblage of stands that not only has morning but evening stands, midday stands that are good for both, and they'll be able to access them without spooking deer. So big changes to come for a small property like this, and I hope you can take some of these concepts right here. Even deer coming off the property on, when they come on, they turn right or left. They follow that deer trail. They hit a small hunting plot that's down here on the south that's just for a pass through for a stand location where there's a thick amount of conifer. They can put an actual tripod stand in there. It's literally 10 yards off the road. They can get into it, look right down into that food plot. But bottom line is, when that deer comes on, they turn right or left, they follow, they hit the habitat improvements of water, hard regeneration, switchgrass pockets with red osier dogwood and hinge cuts. They hit the food plot, they find the food plot, and they stay. They stay during the daylight. The clients have an opportunity to sneak in and hunt them. And that's one way that will change properties around. We'll go over a few other small parcel examples, but a lot of these concepts, whether you have 40 acres, 80 acres, or a lot smaller, you can apply to your own parcel. And the cool thing is, with the changes they're going to make this year, they'll have a significant increase in the enjoyment and their hunting success, the level of hunting success they find just this season. Folks, this doesn't take years. Get it done this year, follow the concepts, and you'll have a better hunting season this season. And it'll change for several years appreciable, that you'll notice the changes for a few years to come, but definitely a better season just this season. It takes that amount of time, just a growing season, and that's it. Once you change your hunting concepts and habitat concepts, so you can have a great hunt, great herd this season and beyond. Hey, I'm really excited to introduce to you our Hills and Thermals web class. It's something we worked on all year. We're trying to put lots of facets of scouting, aerial imagery, diagrams on the whiteboard to really teach you how the wind moves through hills and how you should find bedding areas, how it relates to deer movements in general, how that relates to, this is a bedding area stand, this is a food source afternoon stand. We really tried to put this together and offer you a complete picture of how to navigate hills and find better success consistently where you hunt.